If you've ever thought of quilting your own projects but just don't know where to start, I have the perfect first steps for you. I've put together a PDF guide. I call it 3 Steps Toward Freehand Freedom. These are the baby steps, but they can help you move past your overwhelm and show you that yes, indeed, freehand quilting can be learned. So if you'd like to snag this PDF, there's a link in the show notes, or if you're an Instagram user, just message me 3 steps. That's the number 3 STEPS, and I'll send you that link. Let today be the day you get started.
I essentially just got bored one summer as a teenager and went to the library, and I don't know what I was looking for exactly, but I found the quilting section, and I've always been a creative person, so I kind of latched onto that and got some fat quarters and went to town. So it was just bored.
Welcome to Measure Twice, Cut Once, the podcast where we hear quilters and other crafters' stories and draw encouragement and even life lessons from them. I'm your host, Susan Smith, coming to you from my long arm quilting studio, Stitched by Susan. Here I spend lots of hours doing freehand edge-to-edge quilting. If you're not a quilter and those terms mean nothing at all to you, it's basically doodling on a quilt top with a 50-pound pencil with needle and thread attached, and at very high speeds, I might add. This week, some of the designs I've quilted are all over feathers, which is one of my personal favorites, and hibiscus flowers. If you're into freehand quilting and would like to see some of these designs, check out my Pinterest board with a gallery of photos. I'll put the link to that board in the show notes below. Meanwhile, it's about time for a coffee break and a visit with fellow quilt maker Rachelle Craig. Today's Pins and Needles is brought to you by The Will and Dave Show.
Hi, I'm the Will half of The Will and Dave Show, a short little podcast that myself and the eponymous Dave like to record talking about the things that really matter to us, whether that's social, political, or pop culture. Usually we don't see eye to eye, but more often than not, we can find some common ground in there somewhere. And now, back to Pins and Needles, with a quick tip for all you sharp quilters out there.
If you've got a freshly pieced quilt, you're getting ready to take it to the long armor, here's a tip for you. When you're preparing the backing, lots of times backings will have a seam in them, and I know I, as a long armor, prefer that backing seam to be pressed open. It lays more flat in the finished quilt. So if you're pressing that seam open, here's today's tip. Fold that backing to transport to your long armor anywhere but right at that seam. Can you imagine if you make the fold right at that seam, it's folding that seam allowance back closed again, and it's going to want to stay closed when your long armor is trying to load it on their machine. So instead, fold it to one side or the other. Even just an inch will be plenty, just enough so that your freshly pressed open seam stays pressed. If you're interested in supporting this podcast, go to buymeacoffee.com/StitchedBySusan, where for the price of one delicious coffee, you're able to make a one-time contribution. This helps me get a better microphone and enables me to keep bringing you these weekly episodes. Thank you so much for your support, and maybe take a moment now to refill your cup as you settle back to enjoy today's interview. So today I have with me in my studio Rachelle Craig. Rachelle's a former construction engineer turned designer pursuing her longtime dream of designing quilt patterns. While staying home in 2020, Rachelle turned to the online quilting community for support and inspiration during the pandemic and is very appreciative of the friends she's made along the way. Rachelle lives in rural Wisconsin with her husband, 2 cats, and a herd of cows. Oh, I have lots of questions about those. So, Rachelle, what brought you into the world of quilting?
I essentially just got bored one summer as a teenager and went to the library, and I don't know what I was looking for exactly, but I found the quilting section, and I've always been a creative person, so I kind of latched onto that and got some fat quarters and went to town. So it was just bored.
So then quilting is not so much in your background, not a thing your mother and your grandmother and your aunt were all doing, right? Just a thing that you picked up and dove into.
Yeah, I knew my grandparents, both my grandmother and my grandfather on my maternal side, they quilted, but it was never really a thing that they tried to get me into. And then my mother sewed her own clothes growing up, but it was nothing that was really introduced to me as a child. I just kind of found it on my own, and they were all for me keeping at it.
So you said that it's just during the pandemic and sort of the growth in the online community. Is that what led you to pattern designing, or were you already in that?
I've always wanted to do it. I'm an engineer by trade, so doing designs and drawings, that's in my blood. I can't help but do that. So I've always wanted to do it on a a large construction scale. I kind of wanted to do it in quilt scale at some point in time, and really the pandemic kind of nudged me in that right direction. And a couple online friends saw one of my test blocks for something I was doing, a color study, and they said, if you don't make this into a quilt pattern, we will. So they
so hop to it.
Yeah.
Was your first pattern Cornerstone? Is that right? And is that the one? Corner. Okay. And what was the inspiration behind that one that's really unique?
That was that was inspired by I collect old antique tractor wrenches. So it was inspired by an antique tractor wrench that I found in my in-laws' basement. So
I do think that's the most unique pattern inspiration I've heard. Usually it's tile floor or a piece of art but no, antique tool. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So maybe describe, if you can, for us a little bit of that cornered pattern.
Cornered it's a modern take on the traditional log cabin quilt. It has two, I guess they call them quarter log cabins, and then two tunnel style log cabins, and they're connected in it's kind of like an infinity loop with a set of strips connecting the log cabin pieces. And it's really cool. It's like an illusion. It's really exciting when people see it. They're like, wow, I need to make that. I don't know what colors, but I'm going to make that. So it's been my most popular seller. They keep coming. I'm so excited.
I can totally see why. When I looked it up on your website, it's really, really eye-catching and very contemporary. And that's very in vogue right now. They're very graphic, very just a strong statement quilts. And I love that.
It's a quick make too. So that I'm sure that helps too.
Always nice.
Yes.
So where do you look for some of your color inspiration?
I actually did a YouTube video about this a few weeks ago. I really tend to choose my backings first, so I go towards the pretty floral prints and the bold backings. I don't mind using a bold backing, but on the front I'm a solids kind of gal, so I literally just take from the selvage line and pull my colors from there for my quilts, whether I use that backing or not. I just like to pull from colors that are already together. Mm-hmm. It makes things easier, and stuff like paint chips and just fabric swatches and clothing magazines. It's just an easy place to get colors all in one place that you already know they go together.
True. That's true. It takes the guesswork out of it, doesn't it? I feel like a couple of your designs have the kind of rich solids of what I think of as Pennsylvania Dutch quilts from Amish Country, right? They have so many of those jewel kind of tones in their quilts. Do you see that influence too?
Yeah, I grew up in Amish Country, or near Amish Country, and I just figured out recently where I get my love of dark backgrounds with the jewel tone colors. It's from the Amish, and it's just simply, simple solids and simple colors and simple designs just make a huge impact when you put it on a black background. I can't get enough of it. So it's always my go-to.
I completely agree. And from my point of view, because I'm a long arm quilter, the quilting shows up fantastically on solids. So that's always a great sort of canvas to be quilting on.
Exactly.
So what kind of quilters do you write your patterns for? Are these things that beginners will want to consider? Do they need to have a little experience under their belt? What do you think?
I write my patterns for quilters that are not just starting out, but have maybe 2 to 3, depending on the difficulty, 2 to 3 quilts under their belts. I don't go into testing your 1/4 inch seams or anything like that in my patterns. It's expected that you have a little bit of a background, but I like to make them accessible for confident beginners, and then for any experienced quilters who just really need a a quick make and an easy quilt and don't really have to think about much of anything. Just I need to make a quilt and, get their creative juices going. So it's exciting.
I can certainly see the value in that. I make a lot of quilts and some of them are a little more complex. And after one of those, I always feel like it's almost like a palette cleanser to do a quilt that's just graphic but simple, not too much complexity of thought involved. So yeah, I can see that.
Creative fix, I call it.
Truth. So you live in rural Wisconsin. I don't know if you're actually on a farm, yes?
We live next door to my husband's about 170-year-old family homestead. So if it weren't for the hill, I could see the cows from my window here.
So how does quilting provide your sort of artistic creative outlet? Like, is it an integral part of your life, or is it just your job, or how do you think of it?
It didn't used to be my job. It currently is my occupation, my self-made occupation. But working in engineering for so many years, after a long day, I had numbers in my head and, straight lines. And I had to draw the lines this distance apart. And I had to draw this. And coming home and just being able to put, color and vibrancy. And I can put the lines wherever I want to in a quilt. And just turning the steel and concrete into, fabric and thread and getting those numbers out of my head. It's a creative palette cleanser, flushes out the stress and gets the good juices flowing.
You put that well. I can really see that contrast between, what your day job was and this creative outlet now. That's awesome. So tell me your favorite or your least part of quilting, sort of a roses and thorns game. What's the high and what's the low?
I love quilting for myself. I love picking out the colors. That's my favorite thing to do, is making the palette and cutting out the pieces. There's so much possibility there to be had. If I'm actually have a quilt design, I love it when people take my pattern and they make it themselves. Just seeing it out in the real world is just so satisfying, and it just makes me grin from ear to ear. Then they put their own little twist on it and they email me about it that, oh, I changed this, but I'm so happy with it. I'm like, you do whatever you need to do to change it, as long as it makes you happy. I'm so glad.
It's a starting place, isn't it? I tend to be, I guess, a rule follower, so I sort of make patterns as published, but I see people that do the most amazing things and just use a pattern as a springboard, and off they go.
Yeah, they're like, I added a border. I'm like, you add as many borders as you need. That's fine. It makes it look, it's their own take on it, and that's just so pleasing to me to know that they enjoy it that much, to put their own little twist on it.
So since choosing color palettes and fabrics is your favorite part, and I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, do you have any great tips for someone who's doing that? So you gave one earlier, which was to think about starting with your backing fabric and pull colors from that. Any other great places to start? That's often an intimidating thing, right, for a quilt maker?
Yeah, it can be intimidating. I like to start with a color wheel too. If you're really intimidated by colors and you need a quick and easy palette, just grab your color palette and color wheel and choose 3 equally spaced colors, and then add a neutral or 2. So you can do, for example, yellow, blue, and red, or a shade of those. So pink, light yellow, and light blue. And then you add a couple neutrals, a cream or a tan. And there you got your own little self-made palette, quick and easy. You do the same thing all the way around the wheel. And it's really, it's fail-safe. You can't really go wrong with picking colors that way.
And I can kind of see that, because if they are equidistant pretty much on the wheel, they'll play well together and complement each other, right?
Exactly.
Yep. Good to take the mystery out of it. Certainly.
Yeah. If you're looking for a design inspiration of your own, I suggest looking at the little things in life. One of my cornered quilt was inspired by an antique tractor wrench that I found. Iterate was inspired by me cutting a mango open for a fruit salad. And Matrican was inspired by a tractor hood and a heirloom quilt with plaid fabric on it. So it's just a addition of all the little things in life that come out to a lot of fun quilts in the end for me. So it's just I don't have the big city to inspire me. I gotta look at the little things, the blades of grass and little patterns and details here and there that I can find for my inspiration.
I love that. The little things do indeed matter.
Mm-hmm.
So, if people are looking for your patterns, I will put all your links in the post notes, but maybe give at least 1 or 2 places where they could find your patterns. And do you sell fabric kits for them or no?
I do not. I outsource my fabric kits to, it just depends on the pattern where I outsource them to, but a few online small businesses is what I like to source my patterns or my kits out to for my patterns. I can be found pretty much every day on Instagram at Rachelle_handmade or on my website, RachelleHandmade.com. I also have a private Facebook group with just my stuff and people making my patterns on there. And then on my website, there's a link to my Etsy store where you can purchase all of my patterns, digital and some printed.
Fantastic. Well, that's where you can go, folks, to find Rachelle's patterns. And I encourage you to check them out. They are very, very graphic. And of course, I'm looking at Rachelle on the screen and I'm seeing behind her cornered quilt made up. And I'm all admiration. That was the first one of her designs that I saw. And it is really beautiful. And it really is an optical illusion. I love it. So thank you so much for joining us today, Rachelle. I'm happy to hear your story and to hear that quilting is thriving in Wisconsin.
Thank you. Have a good one.
And thank you for tuning into the show. If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcast or the podcast app of your choice. It really helps other listeners to find the show so they can hear these stories too. For information on classes I offer or quilting services, please see my website, StitchedBySusan.com. If you're a long-arm quilter and looking for freehand tips, take advantage of the live and unscripted episodes on my Facebook page, Stitched by Susan. Replays are also available on my YouTube channel, also Stitched by Susan. And if pictures are your preference, check out my Pinterest galleries of edge-to-edge and custom quilting projects. All these direct links can be found in the show notes below. So until next time, may your sorrows be patched and your joys be quilted.